The hardest lies are the ones you tell yourself every morning. The fluorescent lights above the hospital bathroom mirror were merciless. They highlighted every flaw, every shadow, every detail I wished would disappear. I leaned closer to the glass and carefully blended another layer of foundation across my cheek. The motion was practiced, precise, automatic. I had done it so many times that my hands no longer hesitated. Concealer, foundation, powder, blend, smile, pretend. The woman staring back at me almost looked normal. Almost. I tilted my head slightly, checking the result from different angles. Under the harsh white lighting, I could still see faint discoloration beneath the makeup, but most people would not notice. Most people never looked closely enough. They saw what they expected to see. A nurse arriving early for another 12-hour shift. A woman who smiled politely. Someone dependable. Someone fine. I grabbed my badge from the counter and took a slow breath. Just get through today, I whispered to my reflection. It had become my favorite lie. Outside the bathroom, Brooklyn Community Hospital was already waking up. The scent of disinfectant filled the air. Rubber saws squeaked against polished floors. Monitors beeped steadily from patient rooms. The familiar sounds usually comforted me. Hospitals made sense. People were hurting and you helped them. Simple. Honest. Unlike the rest of life. I walked toward the pediatric wing carrying a clipboard and a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. The sunrise painted soft gold streaks through the eastern windows, casting long shadows across the hallway. For a brief moment, everything felt peaceful. Then I heard small footsteps running toward me. Miss Olivia. A little boy named Ethan nearly collided with my legs. He could not have been older than 7. His curly brown hair looked like it had lost an argument with a pillow. I laughed despite myself. Slow down, buddy. He grinned and immediately wrapped his arms around my waist. Ethan had been waiting for heart surgery for weeks. Most adults would have been terrified. Somehow he spent every day making everyone else feel better instead. Guess what? He said. What? The doctor said I get extra pancakes today. That sounds like excellent news. I know. He looked up at me proudly. Then his smile faded. Does your face hurt? The question hit me like a bucket of ice water. My heartbeat stumbled. For a second I could not speak. Children noticed everything. They had not yet learned how to politely ignore uncomfortable truths. Ethan pointed toward my cheek. Right there. Instinctively, my hand moved to the spot beneath the makeup. Why would it hurt? I asked gently. Because it looks like it does. My throat tightened. Around us, nurses moved through the corridor. Phones rang at the front desk. Nobody paid attention to our conversation. Yet I suddenly felt exposed beneath the bright hospital lights. Ethan studied me with complete sincerity. No judgment. No suspicion. Just concern. I am okay, I said softly. Promise, he asked. I forced a smile. Promise. He seemed satisfied. Children wanted to believe people. Adults wanted reasons not to. Ethan ran back toward his room, leaving me standing alone in the hallway. I watched him disappear around the corner. Then I turned toward a nearby window overlooking the parking lot. The morning sun had climbed higher now. People were arriving for work. Deliveries were being unloaded. Another ordinary day was beginning. I touched my cheek again and stared at my reflection in the glass. The makeup was still perfect. The secret was still hidden. But for the first time that morning, I could not stop thinking about a simple question from a 7-year-old boy. Does your face hurt? And somewhere deep inside, a voice I had spent months ignoring finally answered. Yes. The hospital cafeteria smelled like burnt coffee and overcooked eggs. By 8 o'clock, every table was occupied by exhausted nurses, doctors finishing overnight shifts, and family members clutching paper cups while waiting for news they could not control. I stood in line for another coffee I did not need, mostly because I wanted an excuse to stop thinking. Ethan's question had followed me all morning. Does your face hurt? Children forgot things quickly. Adults did not. I finally reached the counter, paid for my coffee, and turned toward the elevators. That was when the front entrance doors opened. At first, nobody reacted. Then subtle changes moved through the lobby. Security straightened. Administrators glanced toward the entrance. Even a few doctors paused their conversations. The group that entered was not loud. They did not need to be. Four men in dark suits stepped inside first. Professional. Alert. Behind them walked a man who immediately drew every eye in the room without seeming to notice. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in an expensive charcoal suit that fit perfectly. Dark hair. Calm expression. The kind of confidence that could not be purchased because it came from knowing exactly who you were.
Nicolas Romano.
I recognized him instantly. Everyone in New York knew the name. News articles called him an investor. Business magazines called him a visionary. The internet called him many other things. Most people simply called him powerful. He moved through the lobby beside an elderly woman holding his arm. Unlike him, she smiled warmly at everyone who looked her way. A volunteer rushed forward with a wheelchair. The elderly woman waved it away. Nicholas looked down at her and said something that made her laugh. The moment felt strangely normal. Human. I watched them disappear toward the cardiology wing before realizing I was staring. Embarrassed, I headed for the elevators. By noon, the hospital had returned to its usual rhythm. Patients needed medication. Charts needed updating. Families needed reassurance. Work helped. Work always helped. Gave my mind somewhere else to go. I was leaving a patient room when I nearly collided with someone coming around the corner. Coffee splashed onto my hand. "I am so sorry," I said immediately. "My fault," a deep voice replied. My stomach dropped. I looked up. Nicolas Romano stood less than 3 feet away. Up close, he looked even more intimidating. Not because he seemed angry, because his attention felt complete, focused, like he noticed things other people missed. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yes." I stepped back quickly. "Just distracted." His gaze lingered on my face for half a second longer than normal. Not enough to be rude. Just enough to make me uncomfortable. Instinctively, I turned slightly toward the brighter hallway lights. "Long day?" he asked. "It is a hospital," I said. "They all are." Something almost resembling amusement touched his expression. "Fair point." A nurse called my name from down the hall. Relief flooded through me. I should get back to work. Of course. I started walking away. Then his voice stopped me. "Miss Brooks." I turned. "Yes." Nicholas studied me carefully. "You should take better care of yourself." My heartbeat stumbled. For one terrifying second I thought he knew. Then he simply nodded politely and continued down the corridor toward the cardiology unit. I stood frozen in place, watching him disappear around the corner. Somehow, without asking a single direct question, he had left me feeling more exposed than Ethan had earlier that morning. The afternoon dragged by in a blur of patient charts, medication schedules, and endless footsteps echoing through the hospital corridors. Usually, work helped me disappear inside my own routine. Not today. Every time I turned a corner, I found myself remembering the way Nicolas Romano had looked at me. Not staring. Not judging. Just noticing. Somehow that felt worse. Most people accepted the explanations they were given. They heard what they expected to hear and moved on. Nicholas did not seem like that kind of man. By 3 o'clock, rain had begun tapping softly against the hospital windows. Gray clouds swallowed the skyline outside, turning the city into a watercolor of steel and mist. I was updating patient records at the nurse's station when one of my coworkers waved me over. "Olivia, room 312 needs fresh blankets." "Got it." I grabbed a stack of linens and headed down the hall. Room 312 belonged to an elderly woman recovering from heart surgery. When I entered, she was smiling. Sitting beside her bed was Nicolas Romano. His grandmother. Of course. The resemblance was subtle but unmistakable now that I looked closely. The same eyes. The same quiet confidence. His grandmother immediately brightened when she saw me. "There she is. How are you feeling today, Mrs. Romano?" I asked. "Better now." She pointed toward her grandson. "He worries too much." Nicholas sighed. "That is not true." "It absolutely is." She laughed softly before turning back to me. "This one has been asking questions about everyone taking care of me." My stomach tightened. "Questions?" "Only good things," she assured me. "Although he seems particularly interested in whether people are sleeping enough." Her eyes sparkled mischievously. I nearly dropped the blankets. Nicholas remained perfectly composed. The hospital works long hours. We all do, I replied carefully. Some more than others. His gaze briefly met mine. Something uncomfortable flickered in my chest. I quickly focused on replacing the blankets. The conversation moved on to medication schedules and discharge plans. Eventually I escaped back into the hallway. Relief lasted less than 10 minutes. Near the end of my shift, a patient accidentally knocked a cup of water from a bedside table. The cold splash struck my shoulder and soaked part of my uniform. I am so sorry, the patient said immediately. Do not worry about it. I smiled reassuringly. Accidents happen. The stain was harmless, but I needed to clean up before heading home. I slipped into an empty staff restroom and stared at my reflection. The water had smeared part of the makeup along my cheek. My heartbeat accelerated. Beneath the fluorescent lights, faint discoloration showed through. Not much. Just enough. I reached into my bag and quickly searched for my compact mirror. Empty. Panic rose inside me. I must have left it in the break room. For several seconds I stood frozen. Then I grabbed a paper towel and did the best I could. Maybe nobody would notice. Maybe. As I stepped back into the hallway, I almost collided with someone. Again.
Nicholas Romano.
My pulse immediately spiked. His eyes moved toward my face. Only for a second, but a second was enough. Silence stretched between us. Rain tapped softly against distant windows. Hospital monitors beeped somewhere down the corridor. Finally he spoke. You should go home. The words sounded simple. Yet something in his voice told me he had seen exactly what I had spent months trying to hide. And for the first time I was no longer sure the lie was working. The rain was falling harder when I finally left the hospital. Water streamed down the tall glass windows and transformed the city lights into blurred ribbons of gold and white. Normally, I would have felt relieved at the end of a shift. Not tonight. Nicholas Romano's words followed me all the way to the employee parking lot. You should go home. He had not asked what happened. He had not accused me of lying. Somehow that made everything worse. I unlocked my aging sedan and sat behind the steering wheel without starting the engine. The silence felt heavy. My reflection stared back at me from the dark windshield. Tired eyes. Forced smile. Makeup that was no longer hiding everything. For a long moment, I just sat there listening to rain strike the roof. Then my phone buzzed. The sound made me jump. A text message. My stomach tightened before I even looked at the screen. I already knew who it was from. The message was short. Where are you? I stared at the words. A second message arrived. Why are you not home yet? My fingers hovered above the screen. I typed a response. Deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. Eventually I settled on something simple. Running late at work. Be home soon. 3 dots appeared immediately. Then vanished. Then appeared again. Finally a reply arrived. Do not make me wait. A cold feeling settled in my chest. Outside, thunder rumbled somewhere over the East River. I started the car and pulled onto the wet streets. Traffic crawled through the rain. Headlights reflected across the pavement like rivers of light. By the time I reached my apartment building, nearly an hour had passed. The structure itself was old and tired, squeezed between a laundromat and a convenience store. Nothing about it stood out, which was exactly why I had chosen it years ago. Invisible places felt safer. I climbed the stairs slowly. Every step seemed heavier than the last. At apartment 4B, I paused with my key in my hand. The hallway smelled faintly of old carpet and cleaning products. I considered turning around, driving somewhere else, anywhere else. But I was exhausted. And exhaustion has a way of making impossible choices for you. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The apartment was dark except for a lamp glowing in the corner of the living room. Someone was already there. My pulse accelerated instantly. You are late. The voice came from the couch. Calm. Controlled. Familiar. I forced myself to sound normal. The hospital was busy. Silence followed. I set my bag down carefully and avoided eye contact. The air felt tight. Uncomfortable. Every movement suddenly seemed important. You work too much, the voice said. Someone has to pay the bills. Another silence. Then a slow exhale. You should take better care of yourself. The words hit me unexpectedly because they were almost identical to what Nicholas had said earlier. For a moment, two completely different worlds collided inside my head. One felt like concern. The other felt like obligation. I hated that I could tell the difference. Later that night, long after the apartment had gone quiet, I stood alone in the bathroom staring into the mirror again. I reached for a makeup remover pad and slowly wiped away the foundation. Layer by layer, the truth emerged beneath the fluorescent light. I looked at my reflection and wondered how many people had seen it. Ethan. Maybe Nicholas. Maybe more. Then I remembered the way Nicholas Romano had looked at me in the hallway. Not with pity. Not with curiosity. With certainty. And for the first time I found myself afraid that someone might finally be putting the pieces together. The next morning arrived too quickly. The alarm on my phone sounded at 5 o'clock, and for a few seconds I forgot where I was. Then reality returned. The apartment. The silence. The exhaustion sitting behind my eyes. I stared at the ceiling and tried to gather enough energy to move. Outside, the city was still dark. Somewhere below, a delivery truck rattled down the street. Another day was beginning whether I was ready for it or not. By 6:30, I was back inside Brooklyn Community Hospital. The familiar scent of disinfectant greeted me at the entrance. Nurses exchanged shift reports. Monitors beeped steadily. Wheelchairs rolled across polished floors. Everything looked exactly the same. Yet something felt different. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was the memory of Nicholas Romano's expression in the hallway the day before. Whatever it was, I could not shake the feeling. The pediatric wing was unusually busy that morning. A winter virus had spread through several local schools, filling rooms with worried parents and restless children. Normally, the noise would have overwhelmed me. Instead, it gave me something to focus on. Work was easier than thinking. Around 10 o'clock, I found Ethan sitting alone in the play area staring at a puzzle he clearly had no interest in solving. Bad day? I asked. He shrugged dramatically. They keep talking about surgery. I sat beside him. That is because they want to help you get better. I know. His small shoulders lifted and fell. But I am still scared. I understood that feeling better than he realized. Sometimes knowing something would help did not make it less frightening. Can I tell you a secret? I asked. Ethan nodded immediately. Everybody gets scared. Even adults? Especially adults. He considered that for a moment. What do they do? I smiled. Most of us pretend we are not. Finally, he laughed. The sound felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. 20 minutes later, I helped a nervous mother complete paperwork before surgery. Then I spent nearly an hour reassuring an elderly patient who was convinced every machine in the hospital was plotting against him. By lunchtime, my feet hurt and my coffee had gone cold again. But something unexpected happened. I felt useful. Needed. Seen for the right reasons. Late that afternoon, I stepped out of a patient room and froze. Nicholas Romano stood at the end of the corridor speaking quietly with a physician. His grandmother had apparently recovered enough to begin physical therapy. The doctor walked away, leaving Nicholas alone. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then an elderly patient nearby accidentally dropped a bag of personal belongings. Before anyone else reacted, I hurried forward and helped gather the scattered items. Photographs, reading glasses, a paperback novel. The woman smiled gratefully. Thank you, dear. Of course. I handed back the final photograph and continued down the hall. As I passed Nicholas, I noticed him watching the interaction. Not me specifically. The moment. The choice. The kindness. You do that a lot, he said. I stopped. Do what? Help people when nobody is asking you to. I looked away first. It is part of the job. No, his voice remained calm. It is part of who you are. The words caught me off guard. Nobody had ever said something like that before. For a second, I forgot every excuse, every practiced smile, every carefully constructed lie. Then a nurse called my name from across the corridor, and the moment disappeared. But as I walked away, I could still feel Nicholas Romano watching. Not with suspicion, not with judgment, with growing respect. And somehow, that frightened me more than either of the others. The call came a little after midnight. I was asleep on the couch with a blanket pulled over my shoulders when my phone vibrated across the coffee table. The sudden sound tore me from a shallow dream. For a moment, I stared at the glowing screen without understanding what I was seeing. Then I recognized the hospital number. My stomach immediately dropped. Calls from the hospital after midnight rarely meant anything good. I answered before the second ring. Olivia speaking. The charge nurse sounded stressed. We need extra staff. Several patients from a multi-vehicle accident are being transported here. Can you come in? I was already reaching for my shoes. I will be there in 20 minutes. Rain still hung over the city when I stepped outside. The streets glistened beneath streetlights, reflecting streaks of yellow and white across the wet pavement. The cold air cleared the last traces of sleep from my mind. By the time I reached Brooklyn Community Hospital, ambulances were arriving one after another. The emergency department was a blur of motion. Nurses moved quickly between rooms. Doctors exchanged urgent updates. Families waited anxiously in hallways. Adrenaline pushed away exhaustion. For the next several hours, I focused entirely on helping wherever I was needed. Time disappeared. Around 3 in the morning, I finally stepped into a quiet supply room to catch my breath. My hands trembled slightly from fatigue. My head ached. I leaned against a shelf and closed my eyes. That was when my phone buzzed again. A text message. My heartbeat immediately accelerated. The message was simple. Answer your phone. I stared at the screen. I had missed 2 earlier calls without realizing it. Another message arrived almost instantly. Where are you? I looked around the empty room and suddenly felt trapped. My fingers tightened around the phone. Before I could decide whether to respond, the device began ringing again. I silenced it. The ringing stopped, then started again. My chest tightened. I knew I should answer. I knew avoiding the conversation would only delay it. Yet I could not make myself press the button. The supply room suddenly felt too small, too quiet, too difficult to breathe inside. A few minutes later, I returned to the hallway and tried to focus on work. It did not help. The phone continued vibrating inside my pocket. By 4 o'clock, my nerves felt stretched thin. I was carrying patient files toward the nurse's station when the world tilted unexpectedly. Not physically, emotionally. The accumulated exhaustion of months seemed to arrive all at once. The long shifts, the secrets, the constant pretending. I stopped near a window overlooking the dark parking lot and fought to steady myself. Miss Brooks. The voice startled me. I turned. Nicholas Romano stood several feet away. He had apparently spent the night at the hospital with his grandmother again. One look at his face told me he noticed something was wrong. Are you all right? He asked quietly. The question should have been easy to answer. Instead, something inside me cracked. Not dramatically, not visibly, just enough. I looked away toward the rain-covered glass. I am tired, I whispered. That is not all. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Hospital lights reflected across the window. Distant monitors beeped somewhere down the corridor. Finally, Nicholas stepped closer, his voice calm and steady. You do not have to carry everything by yourself. The words hit harder than they should have. Because deep down I knew he was right. And, for the first time since this nightmare began, I was not sure I could keep pretending otherwise. By the time the sun began rising over Brooklyn, the storm had finally passed. Pale morning light filtered through the hospital windows, washing the corridors in soft shades of silver and gold. Most people would have found the sight comforting. I barely noticed it. Nicholas Romano's words kept echoing inside my head. You do not have to carry everything by yourself. I had spent so long convincing myself that silence was strength that I no longer knew the difference between surviving and simply enduring. The emergency rush had finally slowed. Patients were settled. Families were breathing easier. The hospital felt calmer than it had all night. Yet inside me, everything felt unsettled. I stood near a vending machine in an empty hallway, staring at a bottle of water I had not opened. My phone remained silent for the first time in hours. That should have felt like relief. Instead, it made me nervous. The absence of pressure sometimes felt more frightening than the pressure itself. Footsteps approached from behind. I already knew who it was before I turned around. Nicholas stopped beside me and glanced toward the large windows overlooking the city. For several moments, neither of us spoke. The silence felt surprisingly comfortable. "You should go home and sleep," he said eventually. I laughed softly. "That sounds nice in theory. But life is rarely interested in theory." A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Fair enough." The smile disappeared as quickly as it arrived. His expression grew serious again. "Olivia." Hearing my first name from him felt strangely personal. I looked up. His gaze remained steady. Not demanding. Not invasive. Just patient. "The story you keep telling people." My stomach tightened instantly. "What story?" "The one about walking into cabinets." My breath caught. For a moment I forgot how to speak. The hallway suddenly seemed much quieter. Much smaller. Nicholas continued before I could answer. "You have repeated it enough that you almost believe it yourself." I looked away toward the window. Outside, traffic was beginning to fill the streets below. People were starting their day. Commuters. Parents. Students. Ordinary lives moving forward. "You should not make assumptions," I whispered. "You are right." His voice remained calm. "Which is why I spent several days hoping I was wrong." That answer surprised me. Not because of what he said. Because of how he said it. There was no anger in his voice. No judgment. Only concern. Genuine concern. And somehow that was harder to face than criticism would have been. I swallowed hard. "Why do you care?" The question escaped before I could stop it. Nicholas was silent for a moment. "Because I know what it looks like when someone is carrying more pain than they are willing to admit." My eyes stung unexpectedly. I hated that. I hated feeling vulnerable. I hated feeling seen. Most of all, I hated how badly I wanted to stop pretending. The lie had become exhausting. "I am tired," I admitted quietly. The words sounded small compared to everything I felt. "I know. I do not know how to fix any of it." "You do not have to fix everything today." The simple kindness in his response nearly broke me. I looked down at my hands. For several seconds, the only sound was the distant hum of hospital equipment. Then something inside me finally gave way. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just enough. "I have been lying to everyone," I whispered. Nicholas said nothing. He simply waited. And for the first time in a very long time, I found myself wanting to tell someone the truth. The truth did not come out all at once. It arrived in pieces. Small fragments I had spent months hiding from everyone, including myself. The hospital hallway remained quiet as morning sunlight slowly brightened the windows behind us. I stared at the floor and listened to my own heartbeat. "I kept telling myself things would get better," I said softly. Then I kept telling myself they were not that bad. Then I started telling myself I could handle it. Nicholas never interrupted. He simply listened. The patience in that silence made the words easier to say. I told him about the constant pressure, the fear, the endless cycle of excuses, the way every day became an exercise in pretending everything was normal. I never mentioned dramatic details because there were none. That was the problem. Nothing looked dramatic from the outside. It was 1,000 moments of control, criticism, and fear that slowly convinced me to stop trusting my own judgment. When I finally finished speaking, I felt exhausted. Lighter somehow, but exhausted. Nicholas remained silent for several seconds. Then he nodded once. "Thank you for telling me." Tears threatened to surface, but I fought them back. "That is all you are going to say?" A faint smile touched his face. No, his expression grew serious again. "I am going to say that none of this is your fault. I am going to say that living in fear is not normal. And I am going to say that you deserve better than survival." I looked away because hearing those words felt strangely overwhelming. For so long I had measured success by making it through another day. The idea of deserving something better felt almost impossible to believe. Nicholas glanced toward the windows. "There are people who specialize in helping situations like this." "I know. Have you spoken to any of them?" I shook my head. "No, why?" The answer came immediately. "Because then it becomes real." Nicholas nodded slowly. "Olivia, it is already real." The words settled heavily between us. Deep down I knew he was right. The hardest part was admitting it. Later that afternoon, after finally going home and sleeping for several hours, I woke to an unfamiliar feeling. Determination. It was small, fragile, but it was there. My phone sat on the kitchen table. For nearly 10 minutes I stared at it. Then I searched for a local support organization. My finger hovered over the call button before I finally pressed it. The woman who answered spoke with calm professionalism. She did not judge me. She did not pressure me. She simply listened. By the end of the conversation, an appointment had been scheduled. Resources had been provided. A plan existed where before there had only been fear. Over the next few days, more conversations followed. Professionals became involved. Legal options were explained. Support systems appeared that I never knew existed. Through all of it, Nicholas remained exactly who he had been from the beginning. He never tried to control the situation, never demanded updates, never pushed. He simply made certain I knew I was not facing it alone. For the first time in a very long time, the future felt larger than the next 24 hours. And somewhere between the fear and the hope, I realized something important. Silence had protected my secrets, but speaking the truth was finally starting to protect me. 3 months later, I almost did not recognize the woman standing in the hospital restroom mirror. The fluorescent lights were the same. The sink was the same. Even the faint smell of disinfectant lingering in the air was the same. But everything else had changed. I leaned closer to the glass and studied my reflection. No foundation layered carefully across my cheek. No concealer hiding things I did not want people to see. No practiced smile designed to convince strangers that everything was fine. Just me. For the first time in years that felt like enough. The road had not been easy. There had been paperwork, difficult conversations, counseling appointments, and moments when fear tried to convince me to retreat back into silence. But every step forward had made the next one a little easier. Support had replaced isolation. Confidence had slowly replaced fear. Most importantly, the future no longer felt like something happening to me. Felt like something I could help shape. The pediatric wing was as busy as ever. Ethan had recovered beautifully and now spent most of his time racing toy cars through the hallways whenever his parents were not looking. He spotted me near the nurse's station and ran over immediately. "Miss Olivia." I laughed as he wrapped his arms around me. "You are supposed to be taking it easy." "I am taking it easy," he insisted. "Fast." His parents exchanged amused looks behind him. Watching him smile felt like proof that good things could happen, even after difficult seasons. Later that afternoon, I finished my final patient chart and glanced at the clock. My shift was over. Outside, spring sunlight filled the city with warmth. Trees lining the sidewalks had begun blooming again. The world looked brighter somehow. As I exited the hospital through the main entrance, I noticed a familiar black sedan parked across the street. My heart immediately recognized it before my mind did. Nicholas Romano stood beside the vehicle, one hand in his pocket, looking completely at ease despite attracting attention from nearly everyone who walked past. He smiled when he saw me. Not the guarded smile I had first encountered months ago. A genuine one. I crossed the sidewalk toward him. "You know most people call before showing up," I said. "I did call." He held up his phone. "You were working." Fair point. For a moment neither of us spoke. The city moved around us. Car horns echoed in the distance. Pedestrians hurried past carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Ordinary life continued. Nicholas studied me quietly. "You look different." I laughed softly. "That is because I slept 8 hours. That helps." We both smiled. Then his expression grew thoughtful. "How does freedom feel?" The question stopped me. I looked up at the blue sky above the hospital. I thought about the months behind me. The fear. The lies. The exhaustion. The morning I had stood in front of a mirror believing survival was the best I could hope for. Then I thought about everything that had changed since then. "Lighter than I imagined," I said honestly. Nicholas nodded as though that was exactly the answer he expected. We started walking down the sidewalk together with no destination in particular. The afternoon sun warmed the city around us, and as I listened to the steady rhythm of our footsteps, I realized something I wished I had understood years earlier. The strongest thing I ever did was not hiding the truth. The strongest thing I ever did was finally deciding I deserved better.